Welcome to the case study course. My name's Kieran Doe. I'm a senior tutor at ACA Masters. When I sat the case study exam myself, I won the ICAEW prize for the highest score in the world. Several of my students have also won ICAEW prizes for their performance in the case study exam, and many others have achieved the highest mark at their firm. During the course, I'll be teaching you the analytical skills and exam techniques to use in order to achieve this level of success so that you too can ace your case study exam. So we'll firstly begin by me giving you an overview of the type of information that is included in the AI and how you should analyze this information prior to the exam, and also how you should use this information in the exam itself. I'll then give you a high-level overview of what is included in each requirement for the exam. We'll then look specifically at each requirement in turn, and I'll demonstrate how you should interpret the requirement, how you should analyze and use the exam paper information in your answer. I'll also demonstrate how you should structure your report and the type of points you should include. There will then be some follow-up work for you to go away and do in your own time to ensure that you can apply the exam technique that I have demonstrated during the class. We'll then move on and do the same for requirement 2 and requirement 3. So in order for me to demonstrate how you should approach each requirement, we'll be looking at the November 2022 exam. So I'll be using one of our mock exams from a recent case study exam. So it's important to appreciate that working with past exams is not a waste of time at all, which is a common misconception among students. So it's important to appreciate that the advanced information is in the same format every time. So we have the same types of exhibit, the same types of information included in every case study business. So whilst the business itself is different, there's different facts, there's different numbers, it's a different type of business, the format of the advanced information and the type of information included is the same every time. In addition, the exam itself has the same 3 requirements every time, and the same types of additional information are included in every requirement. Furthermore, the marking key is in the same format every time. There's the same number of boxes for each requirement, the same types of points included in each box. So therefore, the AI is in the same format, the exam paper and the requirements are broadly the same every time, and the marking key is the same every time. Therefore, we use the same exam technique. So even though it's a different business, and even though it's got different facts, different issues, different people involved in the business, different numbers, the content is fundamentally the same, and therefore we use the same exam technique every time. And therefore past exam papers are great for you to work on your exam technique, particularly prior to your live advanced information coming out. So you can make good use of your time prior to your advanced information coming out by working and developing your exam technique for each of the 3 case study requirements, so that when your live AI comes out and the mock exams on your live AI come out, you've already mastered your exam technique, so that all you are doing is applying it to your specific case study business. So this will also help you analyze the AI more effectively, because having worked through previous sets of advanced information, you'll know the type of points which are typically relevant and where they are useful in the exam. And you'll also know the type of points which tend not to be that relevant. And then, as I've said, when it comes to the exam itself, you've already mastered your exam technique for each requirement. You'll know what goes in and under each section. So therefore, all you'll simply be doing is just applying this technique you've learned to your actual case study business. So that when the mock exams on your actual live AI come out, you'll be able to put in a strong performance, straight away, and then just work on those small little areas you need tweaking, maybe focusing on those small niche points, which might be a little bit more specific to your case study business. So hopefully you can see how a lot of the work around exam technique, can be done in advance of your live AI being released. So I do appreciate how some people may look at it and think, well, having to read through a whole set of advanced information on a different business, is a big time commitment, but that is all just kind of, part of it. So if you also are using our video course, then you'll have access to our AI analysis for the recent exams and also our mock exam papers as well. So therefore, if you do work through a full set of advanced information, such as a November 2022 exam, you'll then be able to attempt 3 mock exams. So 3 requirement 1s, 3 requirement 2s, 3 requirement 3s, and the actual ICAEW exam. So you'll be getting 4 mock exams out of each set of advanced information. So that's not a bad return on your investment in reading the AI. So it absolutely is worth spending time working through past papers, particularly prior to your advanced information being released. And that's just the same as with all the other ACA exams. If you think back to any of the exams, so if we take an example from professional level, FAR, for example, question 1, turn a TB into a set of financial statements, that's always the same question. And obviously all the past questions would be on a different business to the one that your actual exam would be on. They would obviously have different numbers, different adjustments than your actual exam, but you still practice those past papers so you could work on your exam technique and working on what you need to do, the best way to, make your adjustments, get faster, get used to the types of points that the examiners include. Similarly with, SBM or BST, there's those mini case studies in there. There's kind of quite a lot of information to read through about the business. The business will be a different business in your actual exam. You'll have different numbers in there. You'll have different facts. But, again, that was a worthwhile investment because you could work on your exam technique. So practicing past papers is not a waste of time at all. And in fact, prior to my exam, I did all of the past papers which were available to me to work on that exam technique so that when my live AI came out, I could then just apply that to my actual advanced information and the business included within it. So prior to watching this class, because I'll be using the November 2022 case study, it's beneficial to have read the AI document. So the full AI document is available on the ICAEW website. So you'll need to get that from there. And if you are using our video course or you are on our live course, then you'll also have access to our AI summary document, which takes each exhibit and summarizes the key points that you need to be aware of. So both the narrative points and the numerical points, analyzes all of the financial information. So you've got all of the key numbers for the prior year already calculated. So this is all laid out in a really exam focused way, ready for you to use before the exam. And we do this, of course, for every case study. So this is just the document we provided to students in November 22. So this is quite useful if you are working through a previous advanced information because you've got all of the key points summarized, ready for you to practice the mock exams. And in addition, if you are on the video course, if you're using the video course or the live course, we also have our AI analysis video here as well. So you can watch me work through each exhibit, explaining the key points and where they are likely to be relevant in the exam. So it's beneficial to have familiarity with the November 2022 AI before watching this class, because obviously when I'm working through the requirement, I'm going to be working through this. This is one of our actual mock exams. So having some familiarity with the business will be useful. However, you can still benefit from the course if you haven't read this yet. But I do suggest that you do that because, as I say, that will help you kind of identify and help you understand, which points I'm using and why, and particularly some of the AI points which I may bring in to my answers. So the AI provides background information on the company. And as I've explained, it's generally in the same format every time. So we can see that when looking at the AI, we typically have the same exhibits. So we always have, something about the industry that the company is in. And we're told some facts around the industry. We're told some specific information about the business itself, its operations, the types of people who are involved. We had the management accounts for recent years, so we can calculate, recent movements, margins, etc. Then we also have some information about customers, suppliers, sometimes staff as well. So we've got some more detail on what's going on in the business. So we usually have something about their customers, usually have something about their suppliers. So this applies to all, case study exams, and sometimes about staff as well. And then there's usually an exhibit about their strategic plans, so what they're aiming to achieve in the short, medium, and long term, as well as some potential risks as well for the business. And then we're usually given a few specific issues. So in this one, we had, kind of buying groups, warranties in there. And then we're usually given an indication as to a few potential proposals. So maybe looking to move into a new market or winning a new client. So that's usually included in there as well. So as I've said, things are usually in the same format every time. We typically get those exhibits, and then we also get some information from the media, and there's usually a few ethical issues in there as well. So all sets of advanced information have the same type of information, and those are typically the types of information that we have included. So what's really important is that you have the key facts and figures readily available to you in the exam. So, a nice summary like this is useful, and we'll see how each of these exhibits is then used in the exam. So it's important to appreciate that there are lots of points in the AI which you won't actually use in the exam. So the AI document is very long. There's a lot of information included in there. Not all of that information will be relevant to one of the requirements. So there's a lot of information in the AI that you won't use in your actual exam. And that's really important to appreciate that that's normal. And what you shouldn't do is try and force this information into a requirement. You obviously would have spent a lot of time analyzing the AI prior to the exam, discussing it with colleagues, undertaking analysis yourself, and during the tuition videos as well, tutor-led analysis. But it's really important that you appreciate that not all of that information is going to be relevant. And there's only 3 requirements. The examiners aren't going to set them up so every piece of information from the AI is tested. It's a key skill that you only bring in points from the AI which are directly relevant to each requirement. So very important to appreciate that. And that's quite different, or in fact, that is different, and that's the opposite of the exam paper information. So the new information that you're given on exam day, this is highly relevant, and you need to be using this information as much as you can in your answers. So that the AI information, only bring it in if it's clearly relevant to the requirement, whereas the exam paper information is, almost always entirely relevant to the requirements. You want to be using this as much as possible. So exam paper information, use it as much as possible in your answer. AI information, only bring it in if it is absolutely clearly relevant to the requirement. And we'll see a lot more of this as we work through each requirement, both in these preparatory classes, but then also when we look at the mock exams for your actual live case study business. So the case study exam itself has the 3 requirements. And as I've already said, it's the same 3 requirements every time broadly. So requirement 1, you'll have to analyze the performance and possibly the position of the business. So comparing that to the previous year. So actually a requirement that you've done, several times before, really. SBM, CR, BST all require performance and position analysis of a business. So you'll be quite used to this type of question, and it's probably the one that students feel most comfortable doing, analysis of historic performance. As I've said, you've done it many times in other exams. So question 2, requirement 2, is an evaluation of a proposal. So it's looking at typically like a proposed contract or undertaking some work for a customer. So there'll be a financial calculation that you'll be required to do. And then you'll need to question the assumptions and then identify non-financial factors such as strategic, operational, commercial issues, and there may be ethics in there as well. So actually, that might feel quite similar to some of the questions you've done at BST and also SBM. And requirement 3 is also an evaluation, usually of a proposal or a plan, although it could be an issue in the business, so more of a problem rather than a proposal. So rather than being similar to requirement 2, in that it's like a forward-looking proposal, the business is looking at moving into a new market or undertaking a type of work or working with a new supplier. It could be like a current issue in the business and having to decide how to address that. But again, typically it's an evaluation. There'll be a financial calculation to perform, and then again you'll need to discuss non-financial issues like operational and strategic, and there could be ethics in there as well. So yes, out of the 3 requirements, requirement 2 and requirement 3 are the most similar, but they do have their slight differences. And requirement 1, of course, is probably the one you are most familiar with. So in addition to the exam paper being in the same format every time, with the same types of requirement, and the AI being in the same format each time with the same types of exhibits and the same type of information included within those exhibits, the mark scheme is also in the same format every time. So we'll see the same types of boxes, on the marking key for each requirement, and the same types of points included within those. So as I explained in detail, before, the fact that the AI is in the same format every time, the requirements are broadly the same every time, and the type of information included in the exam paper is broadly the same every time, and the marking key is in the same format every time. This does make this exam, fairly predictable, and probably more predictable than the other advanced level exams. So therefore, what you can do is work on your exam technique and develop your exam technique so that you can master each requirement one at a time. And that's exactly what we're going to do. So there's very little technical content in case study. So exam technique is crucial. How you analyze the advanced information, how you decide which points are likely to be relevant and which aren't. And then importantly, how you read the requirement, how you interpret the requirement, how you analyze this additional information you're given, and how you then bring that into your answer, and how you structure your report, the amount of types, the type of points you include for each section, and the number of points, building up that technique will ensure that you pick up the required amount of marks in the exam. And of course, in a non-technical paper such as this, the way to do that is by learning the technique first of all, but then go away and practicing lots of questions one after the other. So not only mock exams based on your actual case study exam, but also mock exams and actual past ICAEW exams based on previous case studies. So as I said, yes, there is an investment to be made in terms of reading the advanced information and analysing it, but then you're going to be able to practice several mock exams on each case study business and then develop that exam technique using the past papers first of all, and then doing that with your actual case study exam and just applying that to your actual case study exam. So what we'll do now is we're going to look at requirement 1, and I'll demonstrate the exact exam technique you should be using in order to ace requirement 1. So in requirement 1, we'll need to analyse the financial performance and possibly also the financial position of the company. So similar to previous exams, we'll need to compare the performance and or position of the current year to the previous year, and we'll need to give commercial reasons for the movements. So we'll give the number and a reason why there's been a change. We'll also need to identify any trends, significant movements, and also we should provide further analysis of the numbers if we can. And then we'll provide some context to the performance. So the advanced information included the prior year accounts, the reasons why items had moved in the previous year. Separate exhibits would often give us performance targets and some context points. So we brought that all together in our AI analysis. So when we analysed the management accounts, we looked at the year-on-year movements. Obviously, this is for, in this case, 21 to 22, whereas the exam paper is for 2022. So we were looking at the previous year movements, and we were thinking of reasons why that had changed. And these all came from the AI. And elsewhere in the AI, we were often told about particular targets, such as a revenue target for each year, possibly like a market growth estimate, KPIs, etc. So these were in different exhibits, but we brought them all together because clearly they're relevant when looking at the management accounts and assessing the performance of the business. So this information was all from the AI, previous year numbers, how they had changed year on year, reasons why, and significant points, trends, targets, etc. And of course, we had lots of context points from the AI as well. So what we'll get in the actual exam is the latest set of management accounts. So in this case, we'll have them for 2022. So we'll have the numbers, so we'll be able to calculate the year-on-year movements. And we'll also have some narrative as well, which will give us the reasons as to why things have gone up or down or why things have changed in 2022 compared with the previous year. So this will give us the reasons why, and that's what we'll be using primarily in our answer. And we may get some additional context points as well. So of course, requirement 1 is quite predictable because of course we've thought about the management accounts, looked at the key numbers, calculated the key ratios as to how we would assess performance of this company. And then of course exam day comes and then we have got the actual numbers and we've also got the reasons why things have moved year on year. So what we need to do in our answer, as I've explained, is we're going to need to give the number, so why or how much something has changed by, so what has changed and by how much. Then we're going to give the reason why, trying to get this from the exam paper if possible, but if not, we can use a reason from the AI if it's clearly relevant. Then we're trying to have a trend or a significant movement or some sort of further analysis, and then we'll have a context point as well. So you can see we're kind of doing 4 things here for each item. Now, we won't always be able to do all 4, and we'll talk about that, but we'll look at the number. So how has it changed compared to the previous year? Trying to get a reason why from the exam paper, trying to identify a trend or a significant movement or provide some sort of further analysis. That's perhaps the most difficult thing to do. And then we'll try and get a context point as well. So something related to that particular client or something related to that particular product, possibly that we knew from the AI. That's probably where the AI is, most useful here in terms of, getting some of those context points. But for our reason why, as I said before, we're trying to use the exam paper information as much as possible. So we'll do that for each of the different client types or product types, or, however the revenue streams are broken down in this specific case study. And then we'll do something similar when we're looking at gross profit as well. So if we're looking at cost of sales, we can look at the individual costs, why they have gone up or down, reason from the exam paper, further insight point, context point. And then we'll analyze the profit margins as well. So we can look at gross profit overall, and then we'll look at the profit margins. And we could be required to do that for different levels of profit. So possibly, gross profit and operating profit. So the first part of requirement 1, as I've said, is fairly standard because you've done this type of question before in BST, SPM, and also in some CR questions. So when you look at the requirement, first of all, it's really important that you identify exactly what the requirement is asking for. As I've said, you'd have spent a lot of time analyzing the numbers in the AI. You would have formed some sort of expectation in your head as to what the exam is going to ask you to do. And of course, you'd have practiced mock exams as well. However, it's really important that you focus on exactly what the examiner has asked for to make sure you answer what the examiner has asked on exam day, and not either what you hoped would come up or what came up in a mock exam. So with all the questions, read this information very, very carefully. So a review of WWL's performance for the year ended 30th of September 22 compared to the previous year, which of course is what we would expect. Review the current year performance compared to the previous year. Your review should be based on a management account set out in the exhibit. It should incorporate the additional information in Exhibit 16 and include appropriate recommendations for improving the business. So it's saying, use the latest set of management accounts, of course, and then, use the information that's provided in the narrative to go with the performance, to go with the financial statements. And then recommendations, which you'd have in every requirement. So it says it should cover, so this is particularly important, revenue. So we know we're going to have a section on revenue. Every case study is required an analysis of revenue. You can't analyze the performance of a business without looking at revenue and some level of profit. So it should cover revenue for each client type individually, each product type individually, and in total. So that's quite important. So when you do revenue, obviously we'll do it overall, but it's telling you to do each client type and each product type. So sometimes it might just say each client type, and therefore you wouldn't need to have it, by product type. Gross profit for each client type individually and in total, and then operating profit in total. So this is really important that you don't just kind of default to just revenue and gross profit and then miss out operating profit, or you default to just doing client type because that's what you thought would come up and that's what came up in your mock exams, and then missing out any analysis by product type. So really important you focus on exactly what the examiner has asked for, and then let this drive your headings. Now there's a separate request for advice, which we'll talk about separately. So revenue, gross profit, and operating profit. So these should be your headings. So, you have your pro forma report. We prepare this for every case study exam. So focus on the requirement. We're obviously going to have revenue. We're going to have gross profit as a heading, and we are going to have operating profit as a heading. But if it didn't ask for operating profit, obviously we wouldn't have operating profit there because there wouldn't be any marks for it. The examiners haven't asked for that. So focus on the requirement very carefully. Revenue, gross profit, and operating profit in this exam paper. So we know what our headings are. We know what we need to do. We know the type of information that's going to be included. We're going to have the reasons why things have gone up or down in here. And we've obviously got the numbers to analyze. So you can, approach this in different ways. Some people like to just get straight on with the numbers. They know what they need to calculate. They calculate the numbers and then they come back to the narrative to find the reasons. Some people like to read a narrative to find out what's happened first of all and then do the numbers. Personally, what I like to do is I like to just have a kind of a quick skim through to see high level what type of information I've got. So this has come from the FD, as we'd expect, additional information on the management accounts. So then this is quite nicely laid out because we've got revenue and then we've got costs. So, this is going to be relevant for my revenue section. This is going to be relevant for costs. The examiners tend to present the information in a friendly way. So the first quarter was our busiest ever. So a busy first quarter. So that could be a reason why revenue's gone up with record number of orders from retailers. So I'm probably going to use that as my reason for retailers. By the end of December, no remaining inventory for several products. So could possibly impact working capital. Fortunately, this did not cause an issue because retail demand gradually slowed throughout the rest of the year, giving us time to replenish. I've got a reason why revenue would go up there. February 22, price review for all products. We took the decision to increase the price per meter square for all products from this date. Average price increase was 5.2%. Again, another reason why revenue will have gone up. I guess that would affect all of the different client types. So prices have gone up, busiest quarter. So, if revenue has gone up, I'll use these as reasons why. So something specific on commercial clients. So sales to them increased. Companies refurbished offices following a return to office working. So that was in the third and fourth quarters. And then we've got something specific on bespoke. So we're told about the number of orders. And of course, we had some information on this in the AI. So we knew from the AI and in the AI analysis class, we could do further work on the bespoke. So the number of orders, so we can clearly see that's gone up. So that's going to be a reason why that's gone up. So, bespoke orders are higher than they were in the previous year. 2 luxury hotels placing orders of this in the second quarter. To satisfy the client's request, we agreed that payment would be made 90 days after installation. So these are like very large orders and larger than previous orders. So that again will be a reason why bespoke's gone up, but that would obviously have an impact on cash, extending those credit terms. So 2 orders of 250K were received from clients who had used them previously. So we told more information about the orders. And I might think here, okay, well, I'll do some analysis on these numbers when I get to doing bespoke. But I can just see here, I've got, reasons why revenue from wall products accounted for this amount. So this looks probably a bit more complicated to deal with, but I'm definitely going to try and use this in my answer as much as possible. Then I've got some information on costs. So CEO of Eaton, who's obviously a key supplier, we're told that they increased prices with immediate effect, gave a reason why, something about payment terms as well. Production staff, 1.5% pay rise. So again, a reason why staff costs have gone up, a reason why supplier costs have gone up as well. So cost of sales there for the materials. So you can kind of see the information we've got here. And then we've got the request for advice, which is the second part of requirement 1. And we can see here, this is focused on cash. Why has cash declined? Implications for the business, action to be taken. So this is kind of, as we would expect, reasons why each item's gone up or down. We've got plenty here for revenue, some for costs, and then the request for advice seems to be on cash. So everything is kind of, where I would expect. So that's what I like to do first of all, kind of high level, look at what information I'm given. And then I can go through and then put in the numbers to see how the numbers have moved year on year and prepare my appendix. Obviously, we're doing revenue, gross profit and operating profit. And then we've obviously got the notes that we had in the AI. So we've got a breakdown by client type, product type, cost of sales, and gross profit as well by client type, and some information as well on admin expenses. And then the SFP, which might be useful if we're then going to have to do some sort of analysis on cash. So, what I would do first of all is then calculate my appendix. So of course you'd had a lot of practice at this, having practiced, the mock exams. You'll get really quick at this, how to use the formulas in the exam software. But, you've got the layout, you've practiced it many times. Of course, this is like all encompassing, so you might need to tweak it based on what the exact requirements are. But you already thought about how we were going to lay out revenue by client type, calculate mix, by product type, calculate mix, can do some further analysis on those bespoke numbers as we covered in the AI class. So, you could do your whole appendix. Personally, I like to just do the revenue part of the appendix and then write up revenue, because I like to just calculate the revenue numbers, look at how they've changed year on year, get my reasons from revenue, from the narrative, and then write up my revenue section. And then I'm kind of like done with revenue, and then move on and then do my cost of sales, gross profit section, and then finish that and then do operating profit. So I just like to kind of focus on one area at a time. I find that kind of jumping around between the areas is a bit of like a bit of time lost in transition. And it's more just, I can focus purely on revenue for now and do everything I need to do for revenue and then move on to the next section. But it's up to you. Some people like to just bash out the appendix, get it all done, and then type it up. There's absolutely no problem with doing that at all. I think there's an element of personal preference in how you do things and in which order. So of course, the 2021 numbers, they're all just coming from the AI analysis document. So obviously make sure you pick up the right numbers and not the 2020 ones. But to be honest, by the time you've practiced several mock exams on your case study business, you'll probably know some of the numbers off by heart. I probably would still just double check them just to make sure you are picking up the right numbers. So you can put in the prior year numbers and then obviously put in the current year numbers, which are coming from the exam paper, just coming from the notes that we've shown there. And you'll know exactly where to look those up, having practiced several mock exams on your case study business. And then calculate the change in absolute terms. Make sure you give your appendix a proper title and specify the amounts, whether they're in pounds, thousands, or in percentages. But then you calculate the change, but then you can just kind of drag it down. And then you can calculate the percentage and then again, just drag it down. I wouldn't calculate. So when we're looking at things like revenue mix, retail's gone down by 1.8%. I wouldn't then calculate that change as a percentage. It's almost a bit meaningless, really. So I'd probably just have this here. So you'd have the by client type, the change, mix by client type, product type, the change, and mix by product type, just as we had in the AI. So just lay that out in the same way, nice, neat appendix. And then you could do the further analysis as well on bespoke, or you might decide to do that when you get onto bespoke. But then I'd just like to kind of step back and just look at the big picture. So what's happened overall this year? Well, of course, we can see, bespoke's had a great year. 17.3% growth, but they've all done well. They've all grown. Our revenue overall is up. Obviously, the KPI targets, you can think if we've achieved the KPI growth target. So I'd be looking at those kind of points first of all. Obviously, prior to the exam, you spent a lot of time working on mock exams and also thinking, what might actually happen in the year and, what the key things that you'd be looking out for. So it's actually kind of quite nice on exam day. You actually find out what really happened with the business and what's actually happened during the year. So of course you can see it's clearly been a good year. Revenue's up for all client types. The mix, you could just sense check your numbers here, but obviously if bespoke has grown the most, then obviously revenue mix will be moving towards bespoke. If retail's growing the least or decreased the most, then of course the revenue mix is decreasing there. So just sense check that, particularly if you've kind of used formulas to drag things down, to make sure you haven't got the wrong reference in there. but that makes sense. And then you can do the same by product type as well. Obviously, PP looks as though it's had a great year, but obviously it's a new product, so it's starting from a really low base. They only had like one quarter in the previous year, so yeah, that needs to be kind of taken with caution before you say it's been exceptional growth. Obviously, there was a target, so we could compare it to that, and then again, you could look at mix by product type as well. And then there is some more analysis we can do in bespoke, but you might decide to come to that, when we write up our bespoke section. So of course, we've got our numbers here from the appendix. We've got our reasons from the exam paper. We know how we're going to lay this out. We're going to take it one client type at a time, number, reason. So we're going to give the number first of all. Then we're going to give the reason. And then we're going to give some further insight point. And then we're going to try and give a context point as well. So we're trying to do 4 things each time, but you don't always need to get a context point. We'll come to the marking key, but there's only one box of context points. You don't need a context point at the end of each one, but maybe just after 4 or 5 of your mini paragraphs across the whole requirement. But absolutely every time you need to have number, reason, and try to get a further insight point as well. So you always need that number, reason, and then trying to get a further insight point each time. And then a few context points. So of course, we've got the reasons from here, first quarter, busiest ever, record orders from retailers. That's going to be our reason there for retailers. So we can start off just as I demonstrated there. Retail revenue is up, the number. I like to have the absolute increase and the percentage. Usually in the exam, they'll give a backslash. You could potentially have one or the other, but I think in a real report, you'd probably have both. If you've just got a percentage, it's useful to have some kind of reference as to the absolute size. I mean, you could even have the current year number in there as well. You probably would have that in a real annual report. But this is just going to the directors. So I would suggest at the least having absolute number for the current year movement and the percentage, but you could even also have the 2022 total figure there as well. So the number with the reason coming from the exam paper, record Q1, and there was also the 5.2% average price increase. I mean, that affects retail as well. So, you might have more than one reason, bring them both in. Trying to use this exam paper information as much as possible in our answer. So then trying to get a further insight point, we said that can be one of the harder bits to do. Could have thought about some of these before. I mean, sometimes there's some further analysis you can do on the numbers. Maybe it told us specific retailers and the order per retailer or something like that. So therefore we could do some more analysis like average order per retailer or something like that. But that wasn't the case here. So the trend was that it's still below the 2019 level. So it declined as a result of COVID effectively, but then had recovered. Revenue growth is good, but it's still below the 2019 level. So that's kind of quite an interesting further insight, slash trend point to have. And then a context point for retail, of course, that we knew from the AI was that demand is affected by the property market. So, a downturn in the property market will reduce revenue. And we were told that a downturn in the property market was on the horizon. And then we do the same for the rest of the other client types. So commercial, so the number, which is just coming from the appendix we calculated, that's quite easy. The reason, from the exam paper, I mean, that's quite easy as well. We were just told here that sales to commercial clients have gone up because they're refurbishing offices. So we've got that there, and also the price increase affected that as well. Like I said, probably the harder point, further insight point, like a trend point. So it continues to grow. So I've used a trend point again there. So picking out the trend. And then a context point again, not too difficult to do. Thinking of a relevant one isn't usually too difficult. And of course, we thought about some of these prior to the exam as well. So you'd have these on your pro forma report to help remind you. Obviously, if there's one from the exam scenario, from the exam paper that's more relevant, obviously use that in priority to using one from the AI, i.e. one which is on the pro forma report. So then again, same for bespoke, number is up by this. Now, we were given quite a lot on bespoke because we were told, the number of orders have gone up and there were two particularly high orders. So the total amount. So actually you can look at, revenue's gone up by 755. So that's obviously due to these two orders because they accounted for 910. So you've got these two new orders and they both exceeded the largest order in the previous year, which of course we knew from the AI. So you can kind of see like the further insight point there. You kind of got the number, you've got the reason, and that's probably more of a kind of a further insight point because that's a nice easy bit, isn't it? Number, then the obvious reason because of these two large orders, and then I'd probably say that is a bit more of a further insight point, seeing that they're larger than the previous orders, or possibly a context point. But it's like an additional point, which is a bit harder than the other ones. And actually, as we identified in the AI class, you could do a lot more further analysis of the bespoke numbers if you were kind of told kind of a breakdown of what revenue was from. So we were told about some other orders as well, so we could bring that into our answer. And we were told that revenue for bespoke, we were given a breakdown for each product. So sales of 80/20 were 14% of revenue, sales of 100% wool were 8% of revenue, and sale of rugs were 6% of revenue. So we saw this in the AI and we could do some further analysis on those numbers. And it's quite common that the examiners might give some additional numerical information and that we can do some further analysis of those numbers. So we then, and this was, the calculation for this was covered in detail in the AI, but we could of course then do some further analysis and we can see the bespoke revenue by product and even then use that to calculate like product mix for bespoke. And even look at the bespoke percentage of total product revenue. So you can kind of see here how that had changed year on year, and we could bring that into our answer. And this was something that we said in the AI class would be good to look at for bespoke. And this is a classic example of like further analysis point because we can do some further analysis on those numbers, and then we could kind of see how the percentage of bespoke sales by product had changed. And therefore we could see that the percentage that was for wool had actually gone down slightly, but it increased for rugs. And these are both higher margin products. So actually the increase in bespoke caused an increase in wool revenue and an increase in rugs revenue. So not only have we done some further analysis of bespoke, but we've also brought in the increase by product type in here as well. And we can see how bespoke accounts for the majority. So bespoke work, so bespoke clients account for the majority of sales of these products. So these products, so selling these specific products is very dependent on bespoke work. So of course we can see that sales of these products had gone up quite significantly, and we were kind of relating that to this bespoke work. So that's that type of further analysis. And that, of course, is the harder skill. Of course it is. We look at what we were doing with number and reason. We would just say number's gone up by this. This is the reason why. But it's these points which are the harder to do. So that further analysis there, like we had here of these numbers, these additional bespoke points, they are the hardest part of the analysis, but not too difficult. We covered it in detail in the AI, that we had this breakdown and what this represented and what this told us kind of commercially about the business. So we've covered a couple of product types there. So you can see we've kind of gone through each client type: retail, commercial, bespoke, number, reason, further insight point, context point as well. So we actually covered a couple of the product types off in here. The one we didn't talk about was PP. So again, same approach, number. So there wasn't so much of a reason. We weren't really told anything about PP here. So we could, of course, that was an interesting number to look at. We talked about it in detail with the AI because, there was this target that we had from another exhibit. So of course it would be interesting to see, whether they met that target or not. So we had that kind of like lined up for us. Um, when we were thinking about that in the AI and included that in the pro forma report. So we could have made that point about PP. Is it above or below the target? Well, it was below. Therefore, the forecast appears optimistic. It's making a loss of this. So that will actually result in the loss that they make from this pilot project being lower because they're actually making less sales. So if they're making a loss per unit, if sales are lower, then they're actually going to make a lower loss overall. So the only product type I don't think that we covered here was 80/20, and we'll come back to why I decided to kind of stop here with my revenue analysis. So of course, we've taken it each client type and each product type one at a time, number, reason, further insight, context point. But of course, we'd also do overall revenue. And this is slightly different in that we're not going to give a detailed reason why, because of obviously, the reason revenue went up by 8.9% is kind of a culmination of the fact that, retail went up by 5.7, commercial went up. We're not going to explain all this again because we're explaining this here. I'm not going to say revenue went up because retail went up by 5.7, commercial went up by 7.3, and bespoke went up by 17.3. Because I've said that retail went up by 5.7, commercial 7.3, etc. here. So what we're doing here, it's almost like we're going from, the number straight to like our further insight point. So we've got overall revenue went up. And then what we want to do here is compare it to a target if we have one. There's obviously the KPI target, but there's also the absolute target of this as well. These were, of course, in the AI. We flagged these heavily in the AI analysis class. But there's this KPI target for overall revenue, and it's this absolute target as well. And you can compare it to the prior year growth as well. So we had all this kind of like lined up here on the pro forma report, because these are key points to look at when you're looking at overall revenue. So number, compare it to the targets, compare it to the average market growth as well, compare it to the prior year growth, and then a context point, so economic slowdown or cost of living crisis, even bringing about COVID that obviously affected the previous year as well. So that's what we'd have there for our, overall revenue. And you can comment as well whether all client types or product types had seen an increase or a decrease. So you can see, we're doing the number, we're comparing it to specific targets, comparing it to, market growth as well, if we have that, or either or, context point, comparing it to previous year's growth. And then picking out to see if there's a trend. When we looked at these, they'd all gone up. So all client types, and in fact, all product types had seen an increase in revenue. So they're the type of points you're including with overall revenue, not the detailed reasons why each channel had gone up or down, because we're doing that when we do our analysis of each channel. So that's how you should approach your revenue section. So you're given the numbers, you're given the reasons why, and then we're combining them. So I like to do my appendix first, and then I've got the numbers. I can look at the big picture, what's gone up and what's gone down. Then I'm including that in my analysis, and then I'm getting the reasons why from the exam paper, and then trying to find some further insight points for each. So let's think about how that translates into marks on the marking key. So we'll look at revenue first of all. And I said the key things I'm doing is number, reason, further insight, context. And I've done that for each. And you can see what we're doing here on the marking key is this box is for the numbers. So retail numbers. So you can see you can have either or, the absolute or the percentage, but I've got both. So you only need one when it's backslash like that. So number, and then reason. So you can see retail Q1 increase in price. So they kind of combined retail and commercial there. But so I've got number, I've got the reason. See, I had this further insight point of still below the 2019 target level, didn't make it onto the marking key, unfortunately. And I also had a point about demand is affected by the property market, housing market. So that's on there as well. So I've got that point. So you can see I've got 4 points. I've picked up 3 marks. Unfortunately, one of the points I mentioned wasn't on the marking key. That's just the way it goes with case study. It's a good point. It's a valid point, but it's not on a marking key. That's all that matters. There's no like discretion here with the examiners. So if it's on the marking key, you get the point. If it's not, you don't. As simple as that. And then commercial, I did the same thing. So again, this is another frustrating thing sometimes that you may experience is, yes, I've got commercial, I've got the number, and I've got the reason, but this is backslashed with this point. So I've already got this point. I've already got the mark. I don't get an extra mark here. You just need one of these to get the mark. So I mentioned these 3 separate points, but unfortunately they're all backslashed with one another. So I only get 1 mark. That's just the way it goes. It's quite difficult to estimate kind of how which points might be backslashed. And then I had a point for commercial, lower margins due to price competition. And that wasn't on there as well. So yeah, again, maybe a little bit frustrating, but I'm not, too worried. I'm racking up the points here as I go. Bespoke, I did the same thing. So number, new clients is the reason. So bespoke, I've got the number, more orders, higher value orders, product analysis, e.g. bespoke product mix. I think I've got most of those. My first reason was the higher value orders. So again, I actually did some further analysis there. You didn't get too much additional credit, but maybe on another day you would. So it was impossible for me to predict exactly whether I would or I wouldn't. It's good analysis to do. Unfortunately, I didn't get the mark there. But it doesn't matter. I'm racking up so many points here. And actually, when I did bespoke, I also included the wool numbers in there. So when I did that further analysis, actually, I'd get the numbers for wool and I got the numbers for rug as well. Because I kind of weave that in to my analysis here. And then we've got so I didn't actually mention 80/20, but we had PP. So I mentioned PP, compared it to the predicted revenue, predictions too optimistic. So I've got that. So the numbers for PP weren't actually on here, but comparing it to the revenue was. So I've picked that point up as well. And then, of course, I've got my overall revenue where I said, overall revenue, and you get these points just for being in the appendix. But I've got overall revenue. I compared it to the prior year growth. I got that point. I compared it to the target. And I also mentioned there was an increase in all client types and product types when I did my overall revenue here. And then in my context points, I did mention, or I mentioned quite a few of these points, but again, backslash, I've already got them, but I did mention these other points as well. And I mentioned the industry growth because I compared it to that. So you can see with my revenue analysis how I picked up lots of points here by following this technique. I've got a really thorough analysis here. And I've got number, I've got reason, I've got further insight points, and I've got some context points as well, which make sure I'm kind of scoring points in all of the different boxes. Like I said, this is quite easy to get these ones. These are just for being in the appendix. I've obviously got overall revenue. I've done analysis by client type. I've done mixed calculations by client product. I've done analysis of bespoke product revenue as well. So you can see how that approach to revenue, picks me up, almost all of the marks here. Now, I said at the time, I haven't done 80/20. I asked it by client type and product type, and this was the one I missed out. I didn't do. And the reason for that is purely just time. That, if I felt I was running out of time, I'd probably stop there, and I'd want to make sure I've got enough time to do my other sections to make sure I pick up all like the easy points in these boxes. So I want to make sure, revenue can be a bit of a time trap. I mean, requirement one generally is a bit of a time trap. So what I try to do is try to be a little bit strict to myself and make sure I get enough points down to get up, most of the marks, but then leave enough time to, make sure that I've got enough time to do the analysis here so I can pick up the easy marks here. So I'll then do a similar approach or follow a similar approach for my cost of sales and gross profit section. So again, I'd calculate the numbers. So we've got the key costs, we've got the prior year numbers from our AI analysis. We've got those there ready to hand, quite quick and easy to populate the spreadsheet area with. I've got some reminders of reasons as to why things have gone up or down in the past, the previous year movements as well, and the trends there. So then I can calculate those numbers, and then I'd just step back and look at the big picture. So we can see that materials have gone up. That's quite a significant increase. And of course, we know there's a reason on the exam paper for that. Supplier increased the prices. And labour's gone up by this amount. Again, we had a reason there for labour. So we've got this reason here for labour. So I'll be trying to use that in my answer. So I'll probably focus on labour. Overheads could mention that as well, but I'd probably focus on these two. So I'd always focus on the ones which have got the biggest movement. So materials has got a big movement, and also ones with there's a reason from the exam paper. So materials is both big movement and reason from exam paper. I'm definitely going to discuss that. Labour, not such a significant movement, but there's a reason in the exam paper. And we could tie overheads in with that as well. I could mention the percentage of revenue. We obviously thought about that in the AI class. And then, of course, we can calculate the gross profit by client type. And we needed to do this in our answer. So we can calculate the absolute gross profit. But you'd kind of expect, Bespoke will have a bigger increase. And then, these two, an increase, but not quite as much because revenue went up. But what's much more meaningful and will add depth to our analysis is looking at the profit margins. So we can see a margin increase for Bespoke, but interestingly, retail's gone down and commercial's just got a slight increase. Could possibly look at gross profit mix as well, but really important to look at that margin. So, we can see here that we've got our reasons here, we've got our numbers, and therefore we can just approach that, in exactly the same way. So we'll start by looking at some of the individual cost of sales, but just like we did with revenue, materials up, this is the reason. Sorry, that's the number, reason from the exam paper, eating increasing prices. Further analysis point, percentage of revenue, could be a good one there. And then some context points as well. So raw prices have been erratic. We knew that from the AI, and being reliant on a single supplier increases risk. So again, labour, number, reason, further insight point, percentage of revenue. And we could also context point here about the operating gearing. So these are fixed costs, and that would, or the fixed element of these costs would increase operating gearing. So again, exactly the same approach there. And you can see I'm trying to do the same thing. Number, is there a point for reason? Yeah, due to the price increase. And then context point, didn't get that there, but I've mentioned it was up more than revenue there. And then labour, you can see we've got the number there, and then the reason there as well. Just racking up the points as I go through. And then gross profit. So we've got gross profit. So again, we could look at that in absolute terms. And that was quite interesting to look in absolute terms because there was the KPI target. It was a specific target for absolute. There's a specific target for KPI growth, for gross profit growth. And therefore we could see that there, and therefore we could compare that to the KPI. And it also meant as well that the bonus would be paid. So that's going to have like an impact when we look down at operating profit. So that was meaningful to look at their overall gross profit. But then, gross profit margin, we really want to look at this. So we said the overall gross profit margin has gone up, and then we're thinking of our reasons why. So we thought about a lot of these reasons in the AI analysis class. And, we said you should think about the change in revenue mix. So if revenue has shifted towards the more profitable client type or product type, then that will cause gross profit margin to go up. So you can see here that more of WWR's revenue is accounted for by Bespoke, which is higher margin. We know that Bespoke has the highest margin, it's got the highest profit margin. So if revenue mix moves towards this more profitable stream, then that will cause overall gross profit margin to go up. really important that you understand the impact that changes in revenue mix have on the gross profit margin. So that was kind of a key point to pick out there. So gross profit margin's gone up. So there was an absolute increase in gross profit margin for bespoke and commercial. So when we looked at the big picture numbers, we saw, didn't we, that gross profit margin for commercial and bespoke had gone up. Retail had gone down, but for those two, it had gone up. So gross profit margin's gone up for bespoke and commercial, and revenue mix has moved towards that higher margin bespoke client type. And also, when you look at it by product type as well, we knew from the AI, we couldn't calculate the exact numbers, but we knew that these two were higher margin, and therefore we can see that revenue mix has moved more there towards wool. So that was another thing that we could have looked at, and we picked up all of these points in our AI analysis. So we went into the exam expecting and looking to do some analysis on the gross profit margin and looking to see how the revenue mix, changes in the revenue mix would have impacted that. So it's moved towards the more profitable client type, and also the more profitable products, or certainly one of the most profitable products. And of course, just like with overall revenue, you can see, has it gone up for all client types? Well, no, it had only gone up for a couple. So we could see that there. And again, we're doing the same thing here with, gross profit. So it did ask it for client type. Again, I've kind of weaved in the analysis. I've got it for bespoke and I've got it for commercial. Probably should have had it in for retail as well. But again, timing's an issue. I want to make sure that I answer each part of the requirement. But you can see, we've got the numbers here in our appendix. And then you can see, so like commercial, had the gross profit margin for that, bespoke, gross profit margin for that. And then, of course, with commercial and with gross profit, I had a point in there. So I've compared it to the KPI and also the mention of staff bonus point as well. So you can see how I've picked up marks there in both of the boxes. And then we can do a similar thing for operating profit. So you can look at some of the costs which get us down to operating profit, just like we did with gross profit. So when I'm analysing gross profit, I've obviously looked at some of the cost of sales movements, because that obviously impacts gross profit. We've already analysed revenue. What else affects gross profit? Well, cost of sales. So we're looking at have specific cost of sales items, moved up or down. So when we look at operating profit, we're going to analyze these costs, because these costs are included when arriving at operating profit. So again, calculate the appendix, look at the main numbers. So selling and distribution, that was quite a significant increase. And so was admin. But of course, we could strip out the impact of the bonus there as well. We'll look at it as a percentage of revenue, so for some more detailed analysis. But again, admin costs are up. What's the reason? Due to the bonus, which we could pick up from the management accounts, and we saw that was going to be payable because of the increase in gross profit. And then a further insight point, slower than revenue growth, so that have a positive impact on the profit margin. And then just like with gross profit, we said the absolute increase in operating profit and what it's gone up to. So I like to have that number at least for, so the current year number for overall revenue, overall gross profit, and overall operating profit, or any of the other kind of main numbers. But I don't have it for every single cost line. For those, I just have the change and the percentage, but I just like to have that absolute number in there, that headline number that I think would be in a real report. But again, absolute operating profit movement, but then focusing on that margin. So the margin's gone up. So why would the operating profit margin go up as well? Well, of course, you can see that these costs, even though they're increasing, they're actually decreasing as a percentage of revenue. So that would mean that the profit margin would go up. So these costs have gone up, but not as much as revenue's gone up. So therefore, that'll have a positive impact on the margin. So then we've included that there, and you can see, having the operating profit numbers in the appendix. Then I've analysed admin. I've got the staff bonus impact in there as well. commented on the operating profit margin. And actually, when I did my overall cost of sales, then I included that point comparing it to revenue growth as well for the same point as well. Costs have gone up, increased slower than revenue, so positive impact on the gross profit margin. So again, you can kind of see with my profit analysis how I've wrapped up lots of marks there. And we've obviously got this analysis in here as well. So already at this point, you've done really well on requirement one. Plenty of marks up here. I said I left a couple of points on the table, so like the 80-20 there and the retail there. That was just purely for a time thing. If you do struggle, then sometimes you might have to miss out, 1 or 2 points that you'd ideally like to include. But it's worth moving on and getting onto each section so you can get the easy marks on each. But you can see, you can score a really high mark on requirement one just by doing the first part, just by doing the financial statement analysis. But there is a second part to requirement one. So as you will see here, well, there usually is a separate part to requirement one. And you can see here that we should also respond to the request for advice in Exhibit 16. So this is less predictable, I think, than the main analysis to requirement one, because it could be on a different matter. It's usually flagged in the AI, so it could be if there's like a staff bonus issue or there's like a bad debt issue or a product recall. There usually be something kind of flagged in the AI. So we had here about buying groups as well, was another potential requirement one additional point for this case study. So usually you have to perform an additional calculation or piece of analysis. There's usually some narrative with it, like discussing the significance and possibly some ethics in there as well. But like I said, it's quite often flagged in the AI, and then we'll get some more information in the actual exam paper. So this one was a little bit different in that we've got the request for advice. There was a board meeting to discuss the draft management accounts. CEO says it's been a good year with strong revenue and profit increase. Absolutely agree with that. As a result, staff and directors' bonuses would be paid. Obviously, the criteria had been met for the staff bonus. However, concerns were raised about the overdraft position. Several board members questioned why the company was overdrawn after such a strong performance. Please advise us on. And as always, when you've got little requirements, focus on them really carefully and use this to kind of like drive your headings and where to focus in the exam. So advise us on the reasons why cash has declined when profit has increased. So a common kind of question, particularly from non-financial people, they can't quite reconcile the reasons how that could happen. Potential implications for the business and actions that should be taken to improve the situation. So we've kind of got a clear structure here. And when you're told do this, and do that, then I have those as headings to keep my answer really focused. So reasons why cash has declined, implications, recommendations. So we need to look at cash. So actually, with this one, it was kind of quite similar to just, rather than being asked to look at revenue, gross profit, and then having a separate issue. It's kind of just as though they're asking us to look at revenue, gross profit, and then, cash. And obviously, as we discussed in the AI analysis class, if you're going to analyze cash, then you're going to need to look at working capital, overall. So we're going to need to look at inventory, receivables, and payables. And you could also look at, some other areas as well, because we've got the cash flow statement here. So you could possibly look at, what impact has investing activities had as well. But the working capital was clearly going to have a big impact. This was heavily flagged in the AI, and we went through this in detail in the AI class. But there's also like the dividends in there as well. Could have possibly looked at perhaps more the lack of investment in PPE rather than the actual investment in PPE. But you can see they went from a nice healthy profit to a decline in cash, and it wanted an explanation of that. So could have done this from the cash flow statement, or could have just looked at which is effectively the same thing, but looked at the movements, between inventories, receivables, and payables. And of course, we did have some information in the scenario as well. So we've kind of got trade receivables and trade payables there, but we had some information in the scenario as well why cash had gone down, because we were told that they made these, large bespoke orders, which is great from profit. Yeah, that helps improve the profit margin, helps increase revenue. But of course, payment terms were more generous than the usual, so that would have a negative impact on cash. We were told that the supplier had changed their payment terms. So actually, the fact that we were also told the reasons why cash has declined, I mean, that's very similar to our revenue and our gross profit analysis, given the reasons why. So you could start off, with the main number, cash is decreased to an overdrawn balance of this. And of course, we knew that there was a KPI for cash. So we could have mentioned that in there as well. A KPI for a cash increase, but of course it's decreased. And we knew the overdraft limit is 650K, but we know it's still below that. So they're kind of like the headline numbers there for cash. And then the reasons why. So you'd go through them all one by one, but obviously receivables had gone up, and with that we could calculate receivable days, and that's due to the extended credit term. So again, reason from the scenario, number, reason from the scenario. Payables decreased, payable days decrease, and that's because the supplier reduced credit terms. So these were all the reasons. I mean, you can see that quite clearly from the cash flow statement. How have they gone from a nice healthy profit to a cash outflow? And you can see that, look at the working capital movements. We discussed this in detail in the AI class, but inventories, receivables and payables have all moved adversely. So increase in inventories, increase in receivables, and a decrease in payables has drained that cash balance. And then of course there's a dividend on top of that. So again, with inventories as well, do the same thing. Number, reason, and we knew they were building inventory in anticipation of Q1, as they usually do, the busiest period. So it asked for the implications. So of course, the overdraft has interest, so that would result in a finance cost. And we could calculate some numbers here with that. So when you can calculate a number to either back up your point or to add some further analysis, then absolutely do so. And we could see that the finance costs had gone up. We knew that the interest rate was variable, so that would create a risk if rates were to rise, and also potential penalties. And also insufficient cash to invest in PPE. We saw that as well. Could have mentioned about the dividend as well as being a reason why as well. And then some sensible recommendations, but quite obvious ones. If suppliers are reducing payment terms, find alternative suppliers. If you happen to give customers extended credit terms and that's draining cash, negotiate better payment terms. I mean, you could say factor receivables as well would be another one. Arrange longer term finance rather than relying on this overdraft, because that would have lower interest. It could be secured against some of the assets, and you get fixed interest as well to reduce the interest rate risk. You could also link directors' bonuses to cash. If you think back to the AI, they were all linked to profit and revenue, but none of them were linked to cash, and obviously cash is deteriorating. So again, you can kind of see here how we would, pick the points up in a number for cash. Inventories was a reason why, receivables, payables. We did mention about CapEx. You could have mentioned a dividend, as I said. Could have made just a basic point that, accounting profits are based on accruals and not on cash, because they wanted to know the reasons why they were different. Just a basic point there that some, particularly non-accountants, don't quite understand what's the difference between profit and cash. And then, of course, we had those, the implications. So causes an increase in the finance cost. I mean, some of this was just a reason, but because of the bespoke contracts, profits being prioritized over liquidity, and then some recommendations. So find an alternative supplier, long-term finance, link the KPI to cash. So again, more difficult, I think. I think the one-off piece of analysis is harder than just the usual, number, reason, further insight, context, but not too difficult. And I suggest having a go at it, because there'll be at least a few easy marks in there, but don't worry too much. It's only 2 boxes. It isn't worth a huge amount of marks in the exam. So certainly, if it is a tricky calculation, don't spend lots of time in the exam, doing it and then redoing it, and burning up too much time on it. There probably are easier marks in the other boxes, but I'd always suggest attempting it so that, well, you can get the easy marks for it, but then also you've got something to bring into your conclusions, because you'll need a conclusion on this point and you'll need some points in the exec summary. So then in terms of the conclusions, what we need to have here is the main points from each section. So I always like to look back at the requirement just to double check what we needed to do, because I need a conclusion on everything. So we've been asked for revenue, each client type, each product type, and in total, gross profit, each client type and in total, and operating profit, and the point on cash. So I need to make sure I've got at least a point on each of these covered. So of course, what we have in our conclusions isn't going to be any different from the main body of our report. We know, of course, that overall revenue went up by 1.5 million, 8.9%, and it's above the KPI target. So that's kind of the main point on overall revenue. So what I would do is kind of copy this point down into the conclusions. So don't copy everything for overall revenue, but just the main point, because that's what you'd have in a conclusion. What's the main point, and we need to cover it for everything. So we need something for overall revenue, and I need it by client type. So we need something for retail, something for commercial, something for bespoke, and also something by the products as well. So I've got something on wool, something on rugs, and something on PP. Ideally, should probably have 80/20 in there as well. So I need a point on each of these. So I'm just going to take the main point from above. What was the increase and maybe the brief reason why. So like retail, I've just taken what it's gone up by and the reason why. Commercial and the reason why. I've left all these further insight points here because you can't copy a whole revenue section into your conclusions because it's then not a conclusion. So, I take those main points for each, just a number and the reason, and have that in my conclusion so that I've concluded on everything that they've asked for. For revenue, wanted it by client type and product type. And then gross profit, so I need a point on gross profit by client type and in total. So I've taken that from above as well. I've got overall gross profit, and then I've got a point by bespoke and commercial. Like I said, I probably should have had retail in there as well, but I didn't bring the margin in to my answer. And then operating profit, just wanted operating profit in total. But you can see I've just taken the main number from above. Some students think that they're going to copy their whole operating profit section into the conclusion, but it's not a conclusion, it's just a repetition. So yes, you can copy the main number in because it's factual. What else are you going to have in there? If operating profit has gone up by 54.4%, that's going to be in the main body of your report, and it's going to be in the conclusion because it's factual. It couldn't be any different. So even if you were to retype it, from fresh, it's going to be the same anyway because it's a factual point. It can't be any different. So I would suggest, copying it into the conclusion because, like I say, even if you write it from scratch, it's not going to be any different. And then, of course, there was the cash issue as well, but I take the main point. So the key headline number here, cash has gone down, and one of the reasons why, you could even possibly have one of the implications in there as well. So conclusions is just making sure that you've got a point on everything that they've asked for. And it's a good check back as well to make sure that you've answered every section. Because if you go back to the requirement, you should have a conclusion on each of these. But of course, you should have a section in your report on each of these. And so then that's almost like a reconciliation to make sure that you have addressed everything that the examiners have asked for. And we've got that there. So then with our recommendations, we then need to have a recommendation, some sensible recommendations, some action points based on what has happened during the year. So I always like to think back, well, what's actually happened in the year, and therefore what are the things that they should do? Now, of course, we've already had some recommendations on this cash issue, so we're not going to repeat those. They're only going to get a mark once. So, what has happened in the year? Well, we know that they've won more bespoke work, and that's higher margin, and that's boosted the profit margin. So a sensible recommendation could be win more high margin bespoke work. That would be one. We know that PP didn't meet the forecast, so we could investigate reasons why it didn't meet the forecast. So try to keep these focused on what's actually happened during the year. We know the supplier, of course, increased prices. We've already said find alternative suppliers. We've already got that one, so I probably wouldn't have that in there again. But we know that labour costs have gone up. And that was adding to operating gearing. So could maybe reduce operating gearing, if, for example, put staff on 0-hour contracts. I have actually put here, I've put find alternative suppliers, but also for PP and for distribution as well, because they were reliant on a single supplier for distribution. So that was another one that we could have here as well. It's usually good to suggest in requirement one some further analysis. So we could have some further analysis, like by retailer, for example, or by commercial client or bespoke contract. It'd be nice, as we said with revenue at the time. I said it'd be nice to have some breakdown of the retail clients, and we could work out average order per client. That would enable us to do some more analysis. So that was a good recommendation there. And of course, some of these could have been predicted in advance. We brought some of these into our pro forma report, such as this, focus on the growing client product type, investigate ones which are declining. Obviously, that's not relevant to this scenario because nothing declined. We could have hedged all price increases, would have been a good one. We mentioned some of these as well with cash, and these all kind of came under the cash. So try to get as many down as you can, making sure that you finish the requirement on time, of course. But then you can kind of see with your conclusions and recommendations, as long as you've got a conclusion on every section. So, a comment on total revenue, a comment by client product type with the number which we had. They've / gross profit and operating profit, but I would want both in there because that's what the requirement asks for. And then cash as well. So you can see how we picked up all of those marks. And then the recommendations, picked up a few here. Usually get one for your own recommendation, but more analysis, win more bespoke work, reduce fixed costs. I can't remember if we mentioned something about increasing the sustainability there of operations. But you can see how we would, pick up those marks as well. And you can see, overall, I mentioned the overdraft limit when I mentioned cash. Not sure if I mentioned this point, may have mentioned it. I think we said building inventories in anticipation of quarter one. So we got those there. So ideally, if I had a bit more time, like I said, I would have included 80/20 in revenue. And when you practice, if you can get a bit quicker, you might be able to get some additional points. But you can see very clearly here how I've got close to 100% on this requirement. So that's how we tackle requirement one. And you can see how this technique would ensure that you get close to 100%. So immediately after completing requirement one, you should then go and do your executive summary. So the executive summary, standalone document at the start of the report. And of course, we're summarizing each requirement. So of course, we have already done a conclusion for each requirement. Of course, by their very nature, a conclusion and a summary are very similar. So of course, if we're concluding on the performance for the year, we are of course going to say, and if we're concluding on the performance, looking specifically at, revenue by each client type, product type, gross profit, each client type in total, and operating profit and cash. And of course, if we're concluding on that, then we're going to want to say the key number and the brief reason why that changed. So focusing on the key numbers, making sure we cover all of them and the reason why. And like we said, it's factual. So like I said, with our conclusions, the points in the conclusions are going to be the same as the points in the main body of the report because they are factual. And if we're also summarizing the performance, then it's going to be very similar to the conclusions. So therefore, as a starting point for your exec summary, you can copy your conclusions over. So you want to keep nice, concise conclusions so that you've got a nice, short, concise executive summary. So you can copy your conclusions over as a starting point, and then comes in the real skill of deciding which additional points do we want to add into our exec summary. So you copy your conclusions because they've got the main numbers. They've got the main factual points. Our overall revenue went up by 1.5 million to this, which is above the KPI. That's in the main body of the report, and it's also in the conclusions. That's the key headline number for revenue. That needs to be in the exec summary as well. That's factual. So if you rewrite that for your conclusions and then rewrite that for your exec summary, it's going to more or less look the same, because it's going to have increase, 1.5 million, 8.9%, what it's gone up to, so the 18.288 million, above the KPI of 4% and below the target. There's only so many different ways you can write that. So they're the key numbers. So you bring those into your conclusions by copying them from the main body of the report, and then you can bring them into the exec summary by kind of copying them over there as well. So your exec summary starts off the same as the conclusions, and this is all the unhighlighted text that I have here. The unhighlighted text is just the same as what is in the conclusions. And then you've got your base of your exec summary. You've got your key factual points, which would need to be in the exec summary, just as they would need to be in the conclusions. However, for the executive summary, we can add some additional points. So, of course, we know in our conclusions, all we copied over was a number in the brief reason. So we said revenue was gone up by this with the reason. Bespoke has gone up by this with the reason. That's all we've got in the conclusions, number and reason. But we know when we did our analysis, we had number, reason, further insight points, and also some context points as well. So in your conclusions, you've got number and reason. But what you can do in your exec summary is add in some of these additional points, these further insight points. So focus on the ones which have the most significance, which are the most interesting points to bring to the attention of the directors. And of course, the ones which are kind of like the big picture points, the things which are going to have the biggest impact on the business, or have had the biggest impact on the business in the current year, or will have the biggest impact going forward. So generally speaking, focus on the larger numbers. So, we're probably not going to want to focus on the fact that, there's a very small cost which is increased by like 2%, because that's not the sort of points we want to bring to the attention of the directors. What we want to bring to their attention is things like changes in profit margins, changes in cash, particular revenue streams which are either performing well or which are performing poorly. It's not always a negative thing. We could be bringing to their attention streams which are performing well, gross profit margins which are increasing, but focusing probably more on those bigger numbers. So looking at the overall numbers or the key client types and revenue streams. So you can see we've copied our conclusions over as a starting point, and then we can add in some additional points. So in our conclusions, we had analysis of revenue and gross profit. Now, in the conclusions, I just said, gross profit, what it's gone up by, and then a few changes in the margins. But what we can do to the exec summary is add in some additional points and further insight points. So, an interesting point about the gross profit margin was, of course, that the revenue mix towards higher margin bespoke and higher margin rugs was causing that increase in the gross profit margin. So my conclusions were, in a way, kind of quite bland, in that I just said, number and reason. Conclude on gross profit, overall gross profit's up, so therefore the bonus needs to be paid because the KPI is met. GPM, so looking at the margin, and in the conclusions I just gave the numbers. But then we had, of course, this like further insight point, looking at the impact that revenue mix was having on the margin. So that wasn't in the conclusions, but I've brought that into the exec summary. That's an important point of significance, because then the directors are aware that actually if we focus our efforts on bespoke work, then that's going to improve the profit margin of the whole business. So it's like a big picture point. It's like looking at the business as a whole. Profit margin overall is increasing because of the changes in revenue mix. I'm not adding points in, labor costs went up by 1.5% because of the 1.5% pay rise. It's not really that significant. It wasn't the biggest cost. It's not that much of a significant increase. However, I did decide to add in a point about materials just because, that was a significant increase. And that's really increasing as a percentage of revenue. So that was the most important point in cost of sales where I added that in. I didn't have any cost of sales points in the conclusions. And again, with operating profit in the conclusions, I just said, this is the number, this is the increase and why. And then I've just added in that further insight point about the trend. And then with cash, in the conclusions, we just said, cash, what it had gone down to, a couple of the reasons why. And then I've added in some of the implications. So again, they're more like those further insight points that we were specifically told to focus on, reasons, implications. That was probably the harder bit. And then the recommendations. So in the conclusions, I've just got these basic points, cash has gone down, a few reasons why. But then in the exec summary, I've added in the implications. And again, they're kind of like those further insight points. So you can kind of see the type of points that I'm adding in here. So big picture points, you're looking at profit margins overall, looking at cash, not adding in tiny little costs like, labor costs or overheads, which had hardly changed. So I'm focusing on those big picture issues facing the business and the areas which have had like significant change and could have change and either present opportunities or risks for the business going forward. There's an opportunity here. Focus more on bespoke work, then the margin will continue to increase. Cash is decreasing, and this is could have significant implications for the business. Interest payable, finance costs, could be penalties. Might prevent investment in PPE. So this is areas that the directors who are driving the strategy of the business need to be aware of. So you can see its conclusions plus some additional points. And then the recommendations, again, I had 7 or 8 recommendations in my main body. Again, you need to pick out certain recommendations, the ones which are most important, the ones which relate to the biggest issues that have happened during the year, and the ones which require like most urgent attention. So again, following on from that, win more bespoke work. Why didn't PP meet the forecast? Arrange longer term finance. Definitely should have a recommendation on the additional issue, and always add an additional point on there for the additional issue. So it is quite a skill, the exec summary. Don't think it's just, copy the conclusions. Yes, you can do that as a starting point. And the examiners have, said before that, yes, that's fine to do that as a starting point. But this is where the skill comes in, adding in those additional points. And it really is a skill. And also selecting the specific recommendations as well is a skill to kind of summarize that. Just copying the conclusions will only get you so far. So you can see, revenue with figure, product type, gross profit, operating profit, and cash. And you can see by having copied that over, then yes, you'll get the point revenue. Yes, you've got this. Yes, you've got the gross profit. Yes, you've got the operating profit. You'll also get, concludes and recommends on cash as well. But then is the trickier part. You need to decide which additional points to add in. And actually on this occasion, these are all recommendations. So continue to grow bespoke. I think we got that there. Costs, find alternative supplier, reduce fixed costs. I think we got some of those. So actually, that's the way I did it. I added in some additional points and had some recommendations. Unfortunately, the additional points I added in, which of course, as I'm biased, but I thought they were really good points to add in, add in a bit more on the revenue mix shift. And in past exams, they would be on there. Okay, but in this occasion, they weren't. Like I said before, that is kind of the way it goes with case study. This is good thinking, the way I thought about these points, which to bring in. But unfortunately, those weren't on there. And on this occasion, those additional points in the exec summary were based on recommendations. But I got those still because I had my recommendations in there as well. So it is difficult. Getting the points which are the same as the conclusions is obviously easy. But again, really important you're thorough with your conclusions, because if you didn't have operating profit in your conclusions, you wouldn't then have it in your exec summary either. So really important you're thorough with your conclusions. And that's why I always say check back to the requirement to make sure you've got everything in there. So make sure you've got everything, then you'll get those easy points there, and then you've got those additional points to think about. Now you might think, well, if there's some additional points on the exec summary marking key, why don't I just copy my whole answer, my whole requirement one into the exec summary? Well, one, that's going against the spirit, of the exam. It's not then a summary. It's also going to create a bad impression on the examiners. But not only that, you then won't get this mark for appropriate summary of report, which is actually an easy mark. Just keep your exec summary, to an appropriate length. Make sure it's a summary and not just the whole report again, which then doesn't make it a summary. So important to get that. That's why you need to limit the amount of points that you have here. But I would say, generally as a kind of a rule of thumb, maybe like 3/4 of a page for requirement one should be sufficient. But you can see if you keep your conclusions nice and concise, then you've got more room to add some of these additional points in there. You can see how you would then pick up the points here. I did get these points, but they are hard to get those points there. So requirement one, not too different from what you have seen previously when doing like performance and position analysis, and a lot of the skills are the same. Focus on exactly what you've been asked for, use a scenario as much as possible in your answer. You obviously have in the actual exam you have the pro forma report to kind of guide you and remind you of key points, but always remember to use the exam paper information as much as possible. I cannot emphasize that enough, and you'll be sick of hearing me say this by the time we get to the end of the course. But it's really important that you do that. Firstly, answer the requirement that the examiner has answered and use that information as much as possible in your answer. But it is a fairly repetitive requirement, and therefore, one, you've practiced these types of questions before in earlier exams, and of course you'll get a lot of practice both with past papers when you're working through those past case studies, and also your actual case study exam when you're using the live mock exams. So now that you've seen me demonstrate the exam technique to use for case study, you now need to go away and practice it so that you can produce the same standard of report as I have just produced there. So if you haven't already done so, go away and familiarize yourself with the November 2022 AI. If you haven't already done so, as I said before, the full ICAEW AI document can be found on the ICAEW website. And then we also have our AI analysis video class, and we have this for all the recent exams. So you can watch this to assist you in your analysis of the AI. And on the same page as our video course, you can also download the AI analysis for the exam and also our pro forma report, so that you'll go into the exam with everything that our actual students for the November 2022 exams had. So you'll be familiarized with the AI, and then in comes the important part, which of course is you then attempting some of the mock exams yourself. So you've seen the exam technique that I've used, and I've applied that to mock exam one. So you could go away and practice this exact exam, even though it's the one we've just been through, maybe perhaps a good one to start with, because you kind of know what the issues are and you can just practice that exam technique. So practicing, typing your points like this, getting into the routine of number, reason, further insight point, context point, covering all of the required sections, and then practicing your conclusions and exec summary. And then, of course, you can go on and then do the same for mock exam two. Exactly the same business, just a slightly different requirement. So here we had revenue, gross profit, and operating profit, and then a different request for advice. And then you've also got, mock exam three to go away and practice as well. So again, similar requirement, but different facts in the scenario. So different reasons why numbers have gone up or down, different information that you are presented with in the exam scenario. So just as we have done in previous exams, I've taught you the exam technique, you can then go away and practice several similar questions, one after the other, so that you can master that exam technique. So then after you've attempted an exam question, so you can do the mock exams and you can also do the actual ICAEW exam, which is available on the ICAEW website. So after you've attempted a question, just as I did, you should go and mark your answer so that you can see which points you got and which points you didn't get, and therefore the areas where you need to improve. All of the mock exams come with my model answer so that you can see exactly how you should have structured your points, the types of points you should have included, the way you should have laid them out, how much you should have had for each section. So therefore you can compare your answer to my model answer, and therefore you can see how and where you need to improve. As an additional debrief resource, we also have a debrief video for each mock exam. So during that video, I will explain exactly how you should have interpreted the requirement, how you should have structured your report, and the type of points you should have considered including. So this is a great opportunity for you to go away and work on your exam technique. You can practice that exam technique that I have taught you. Yes, this is on a different case study business than your actual exam will be on, but this is the time to go away and practice and to make those silly little mistakes that you'll make. For example, forgetting to include operating profit even though the question asked for it, or forgetting to include some recommendations with the one-off issue. You know, those small kind of technique mistakes, which will happen naturally because you're still learning, but they're the types of mistakes that are better to be made now, and you can iron out all of these issues, these technique issues now. So when your live advance information comes out and you're practicing the mock exams, you'll be focusing on the specific facts in the case and just applying that technique to your specific case study business. But you'll have all your fundamentals in place. So that will reduce the stress and the pressure that you're going to have when the live advance information comes out, because you're not going to be making small, silly little mistakes that could have been ironed out in advance. Instead, you'll be focusing on the AI, thinking about how each point is likely to come into play in the exam, and then just practicing some realistic exam scenarios, but you'll have like the fundamentals of your exam technique sorted, and therefore you'll already be picking up most of the marks, and then you'll just be working on getting these few harder points, which will perhaps be more specific to your case study business. So there is so much work that you can do in advance of your live advance information being released. And going away now and practicing is a really important part of your case study exam preparation. And like I said earlier, just as it was for all of your other exams, just as it was for professional level and the 2 other advanced papers, you know, you went away and practiced several exam questions on similar topics, one after the other, to work on your technique, to work on, you know, using the scenario. You start to see the types of points which are included in the exam and how they then fit into the answer. So you can do all of that work without your live advance information. So really important that you go away and do that. So then in terms of, you know, my overall tips for requirement 1, and we've obviously seen most of these throughout the class, but just to recap before you go away and do some question practice, make sure you read the requirement very carefully and use that for your report headings. You obviously saw me doing that in the exam. You know, I focus very carefully. Like I said, it's really important to read this carefully and use this as your headings, because this will kind of direct you as to like where to focus, and this is how you should structure your report. So not only we have these sections in the report, but that will also be the basis of your conclusions and therefore your exec summary. It's crucial that you conclude on every section that you've been asked to, and that forms the basis of your exec summary. You can always see this feeding through into the marking key, like revenue by client, product type, gross profit, operating profit, cash. That's the requirement wording. So you need a conclusion on each of those. You need a section in your report, you know, on each of those, and then you'll have an exec summary point on each of those. So you can see how important it is that you read the requirement carefully. So by practicing your Appendix 1, you'll improve your speed. So it is a very time-pressured exam, as all ACA exams are, but by practicing several mock exams, you'll get quicker at Appendix 1, and you should practice it in the ICAEW software as well, so you get used to the functionality in the ICAEW software. So then when you are doing your plan, so just remember that you won't have too much of a plan in terms of kind of writing things down, but you'll have, of course, this, outline, our pro forma report, which is essentially a plan. This is a plan. This is, what you're going to have for each section. Yes, you're going to tailor it slightly based on exactly what the requirement asks for in the exam paper information, but this is kind of your high level plan. So what you might want to do is when you are reading through the exam paper information, like when you see a reason for revenue, you might want to kind of scribble that on here. So retail revenue increased, and then you've got the reason there. But you could just get, your pen out and you could just scribble on there, busy, Q1, or was it record orders. So then you could put your reason there, and then you could, think, what's my further insight point going to be? Maybe I'll come back to that. But then commercial, due to reason, and you can kind of scribble on your reason there. It was something, more working from the office, etc., etc. So you can think about how you're going to kind of plan your different sections and the order in which you're going to do things as well. Like I said, I like to just do all my revenue section first of all, so do the numbers and then write it up. I mean, you might feel as though you don't even need to plan. Personally, I didn't. I appreciate that can be a bit of an extreme approach, and some people like to have a plan. Personally, I just use this, and I just typed it, straight on. I knew what I was going to have for each section, but there is an element of personal preference in what you like to do. So by practicing again, you're going to identify what works best for you, and then, what's the quickest and the most efficient in terms of ensuring you get all of the points. So as I've said lots of times, and I said you'll be sick of hearing me say this by the end of the course, but make sure you use the exam paper information as much as possible and don't rely too much on the AI. So try to use this information in the scenario as much as you can in your answer. It just applies to all of the requirements, but in the context of requirement 1, generally for the reasons why things go up or down, or have gone up or down during the year. So use that information as much as you can in your answer. So I think the hardest bit about requirement 1 is usually that additional issue, additional request for advice. That's one of the harder parts. But just remember, it's not essential to get passing marks overall. It's one of the hardest areas in the case study exam. And of course, we said we want to attempt it because there will be a few easy marks. And then also we'll need a point on it in our conclusions and a point in it in our exec summary. But, don't spend too long trying to get it exactly correct. Remember, we only need 50% of the points, so 100 of the 200 points on the marking key in order to pass the exam. And they are some of the harder ones. So, don't overrun on that, and make sure you get onto, the other requirements in enough time so you can get the easy marks there. So there's some of the harder marks. And, what we want to do is make sure we grab all of the low hanging fruit, all of the easy and medium marks. And, some of the points in here certainly are not easy. As you saw me with the conclusions and the exec summary, just make sure you're really thorough with the numbers. And if you use the technique I taught you, because you've got the numbers in the main body, then they'll be in the conclusions. But sometimes we see students who write their conclusions from scratch and somehow they forget to include the number. So they might say overall revenue increased impressively, but don't actually mention the numbers. So of course, you'll always be thorough with the numbers. Whenever you can use a number to support a point, make sure you do. We're accountants, that's what we do. So, make sure you use a number where you can. But sometimes when students, they've got the number in the main body, but somehow they don't have it in the conclusions. And that's usually because they've just retyped their conclusions from scratch. So try to be short and concise with your writing style. So you can see here, I'm very straight to the point. There's not lots of flowery language here at the start. the written, lots of nice. It's not particularly well written. It's very kind of concise, factual, straight to the point. Certainly not like a nice written piece of work would be an article or like an essay at university. Absolutely wouldn't be written like this at all. But this is just a formal report, and not only that is we're just really just trying to get the marks as quickly as we can. This you get the mark if you make that point. There isn't any marks anywhere for having like a nice writing style or one point flowing on nicely to the other, like you're trying to build up some sort of like sustained and developed argument, and then you've got to look at both sides of it. It's not like that at all. It's not like an essay. So you want to just be short, concise, straight to the point. And I think the best way to really kind of demonstrate that is by looking at my model answers, and you'll see how I do that. Because of course, we're trying to get the mark in as little time as possible. So the best way to do that is to write concisely, because then we can spend less time, but still get the mark. And kind of just coming back to my point about planning, as I said, you might have a small plan for like your revenue and your profit section or whatever else you're asked to look at. If it's something on position, like cash, like it was there, you might have a small plan there, but I think for all of your other points, you can just put them straight on. So, if you're planning, then you're kind of typing points onto here, but then you're effectively just then typing them into here into full points. So there is an element of duplication there, and it's a time pressured exam. So the more you can just get into, or the more you can kind of understand this exam technique and what needs to go under each section, and that comes from practice, then actually you'll need to plan less. Like I know what goes under each section. I know the type of points to include, and I know the best way to type them because I've just done so many of these exams. I don't need to look at this. I mean, I could just tell you this from memory because I know every section, what goes under each section, and the type of points I need to include. And that just comes from practice. So I don't need to plan. So I spend all of my time in the exam typing marks, scoring points. If you're having to spend a lot of time planning, you're spending time, doing this, and then you're just going to write it up. You obviously only get marks in your answer. So there's a duplication there. So the more that you can understand this technique and you get there from practicing it and obviously watching the videos, but predominantly, from practicing it and comparing your answer to the model answer and watching my debrief videos. So the better you can get at this technique, the less time you will spend planning. Therefore, the more time you have typing marks, scoring points. It's points on the paper that score marks. It's a time pressured exam. If you had more time, you'd get more points. And therefore, that's one way to get more points. But it comes with practice. So, don't be hard on yourself initially. The first time you do it, you're going to probably have this, right next to you the whole time. And it's going to take you a long time to do requirement 1. But as you practice it more and more, you'll get quicker and quicker, and it will gradually become second nature to you. So in terms of suggested timings, there is roughly the same amount of points in each requirement. So I suggest that you balance your time evenly between the requirements. And there's always an element of personal preference here, just as there is kind of overall with some of the aspects of the exam technique. So some people like to read all of the requirements, first of all. I think sometimes this is for reassurance. They just want to check that all of the requirements are just as they have been for previous case study exams, performance and position analysis, historic performance and position analysis here, an evaluation of a proposal, and some other proposal here for requirement 3, and it's the sort of things they thought might come up. So here, for example, a contract, and then here looking at the manufacturing of the new carpet. So some people like to do that for reassurance, and that's understandable. So you can spend a few minutes there. Always good to leave 5 minutes at the end to do your cover page. I mean, it doesn't really take 5 minutes, but let's better to leave a little bit too much than underestimate the time it would take here. So you've got a few minutes there to do that. Maybe leave a bit of time for overruns, and then that would give you kind of 1:15 per requirement. So to do the appendix and to do the requirement. So that's kind of like kind of a broadly kind of rough high level. But of course, the way I like to do mine, it doesn't really kind of work like that because I don't just do the appendix at the start. So some people might want to read it and then do the appendix one and then 10 minutes revenue, 10 minutes profits, 10 minutes for the issue, conclude and recommend exec summary. Maybe you find I'm really quick at doing the exec summary. I can quite quickly think of the additional points to add in, and therefore that's 10. But actually, it takes me a lot longer to do my appendix. So I'm going to have 25 there. There is an element of personal preference to it, and obviously, the way I do it is I like to have a quick read. So I obviously read the requirement, and then I like to have just a quick look at the type of information I've got in here and where it's all likely to fit. And then, of course, when I do my appendix, I just do the appendix for revenue, and then I write my revenue section up. So, I can't really allocate my time like this. I have to say kind of revenue, but that's the appendix and writing it up, profit, appendix and writing it up, issue, calculations and writing it up, conclusions and recommendations, exec summary. So that's how I do it. That's a personal thing for me because that's how I like to do it. If you like to do all of your appendix first of all, then you can, do it like this. So again, this is something else which comes for practice. And again, this is something that you can have decided and worked on in advance of your AI coming up. And then obviously when your live AI comes out and we work through it and you work through our mock exams, you might decide to perhaps refine it slightly, but you broadly would have had your timings sorted. So as I said, really important that you now go away and you practice this exam technique that I have demonstrated. So students on our live and video courses have access to our AI analysis for previous exams. So there's the November 22 one here, and the mock exams are available to download on a page, as is the AI analysis document. And then there's debrief videos for all of the mock exams. So during those, I'll explain exactly how you should have interpreted the requirement, how you should have structured your points, and then lots of other useful hints and tips on exam technique there. And of course, we've got them for the other case studies as well. So, if you're a particularly dedicated student, you could go and read another set of AI. I'd suggest going to the most recent ones first of all. So then you can go back and do July 22, get the AI document from the ICAEW website. We've got our AI analysis document available to download on a video course page. And then we've got our AI analysis video where I go through each exhibit explaining how to use it in the exam. And then you can go away and practice 3 more mock exams on that case study, as well as the actual ICAEW exam as well. So you've got the marking keys, but then you've also got my model answers to compare to, so you can see exactly how you should have approached it. You've got the marking keys, so you can calculate your score as well to see how well you did on that requirement. And again, as you actually go through past papers, you'll see the point that I keep making, that this exam is in the same format every time, which makes it a relatively predictable exam because the requirements are the same every time. It's a different business, different type of business, different sets of accounts, or the slight variations in the issues in the business, and therefore slightly different account, slightly different people, but the fundamentals are the same. The types of information you're given is the same. The requirements are the same. The marking key is in the same format. So, going away and practicing these past case studies and practicing several exams is the way to master case study. So you'll invest your time reading and advanced information, but you'll be able to get 4 exam attempts out of it. And for the time being, you can just take it one requirement at a time. So you can now go away and master requirement 1. And then I look forward to showing you how to master requirements 2 and requirement 3 in the next classes. And then after that, we'll begin working with your live advanced information. In the AI analysis class, I'll be teaching you how to analyze the AI and the key points which are likely to be relevant for your exam. And then we'll be working through the mock exams for your live AI business. And I'll be showing you exactly how you should be applying this exam technique to your live case study business. So looking forward to continuing our journey to getting you ACA qualified and a top mark for your case study exam.